What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Neuro, and I'm a career StarCraft streamer, Dota streamer, WoW streamer, and I hosted my first ever Dungeons & Dragons one-shot. And I just wanted to give some thoughts about getting into being a Dungeon Master, what my plan was moving into it, and how the first session went, because it's a pretty big step up going from being a player in D&D to being the Dungeon Master. And the reason is, you go from being a single entity to being God and all the other non-player characters in the world. And you're trying to make sure they have fun and hopefully have some level of a challenge. So I hosted my first one-shot, got 3 players. I know all the players. It was Trisha Payne, Apoptosis, and Kessnuts, so they're people I've known for a while and who I trust, even if it's a bad session, that they won't be too harsh on me. But I wanted to have something that was a reusable location. So the series is titled Parrots Cove, and it's supposed to be like a nice tropical setting. There are a lot of Dungeons & Dragons environments that are very dingy and dreary. It's like some dark, smelly cavern, and it's spooky, and you can't see anything. I wanted a nice setting, so it's Parrots Cove. I generated some AI art of just like generic palm tree beach backgrounds and so on. And I wrote a basic outline in script with a lot of stuff that was just verbatim what my various characters were going to say. And then I also listed out the combat encounters that they were going to have and what they were going to be fighting against, what the HP and the armor class of everything was. And I tried to balance that in such a way that my players would be able to use their abilities but not die instantly. And it was interesting in that level 1 characters are very low HP. So for the Dungeon Master, you do have to kind of respect that and try not to kill them. The idea of having a level 8 health character means that if they take 8 points of damage, they're downed, and if they fail their death saving throws, they die. So you're trying to strike the balance as a Dungeon Master of, I want my players to need to use their abilities, and I want to add some suspense and tension to it, but you don't want to kill your players in the first fight. So being able to balance fights is an interesting concept. And then also being able to deal with some twists that happen. I went into this probably expecting it to go more to script than it did. We had a little bit of time pressure on, so I definitely rushed a lot of stuff more than I needed to. I was just kind of telling you my internal monologue. I was a little bit concerned that if we had downtime, my players would get bored. So I was almost kind of like hustling us to the next combat, when a lot of the best parts of D&D are whenever the players have the time to just kind of talk about a situation or talk to an NPC about whatever, and how those moments give a lot of character development. So for my future sessions, that was one of my notes, was give the players more opportunity to express themselves outside of combat. How you deal with a puzzle or a door or like a spooky room, and just letting the players do some stuff in that environment was something that I definitely want to prioritize more so for future D&D sessions. And then one of the really funny things that happened, which I expected to happen by virtue of it being an online session, is technical problems. For any time you're setting up group D&D sessions, you always have the opportunity for technical problems proportionate to how many moving parts are involved in this. And for this one, I was going to use the new Twitch feature. It used to be called Guest Star, now it's called Stream Together. But whenever I got people into that call and I was putting it into my OBS, the video feed for my guests was about 3 frames per second, which would have been undoable. Like, I could have forced it and you just get to see the players for 3 frames, but yeah, we ended up bailing on that and using the same OBS Ninja system that we use for the Wayfarers that's hosted here. I'm a player in that campaign, not the Dungeon Master. So yeah, we had basically to bail on the whole planned audio video system about 10 minutes before start time, and then I think we finally got started about 20 to 30 minutes after start time. So just going into that expecting for some things to go wrong, I did well with that. I told people it's going to be my first time DMing. If you want to see something that's scuffed, come hang out. And it was scuffed, but I think in an endearing and cute way. Another mistake that I made that was pretty hilarious was when I was changing characters, because I wanted the edge of my D&D series to be that I actually assume the visual appearance of some of these characters. So Jimothy, Brunt, Call, all kind of jumping into the storytelling. Whenever I was transitioning from one to another, I think it was from the Call mask into the Brunt mask, instead of me plugging my earbuds back into the headphone jack, I plugged the earbuds into my microphone jack. And that made the audio of my microphone feed try to pull from headphones, which didn't even have a microphone on them. So my computer just gave my players a kind of a static sound until I was able to stop. But it also froze the video feed for some reason. So I couldn't hear the players and I couldn't see the players because they were their video feed was frozen. I did go back into the VOD and get a quick screen grab of this. Let me just show you real quick. This was my player's reaction the moment that the audio was really messed up here. So it was a pretty funny moment. It could have gone worse, but definitely a memorable thing. And also a life lesson of don't plug earbuds into the microphone jack. That's important. That's not where it goes. But I made that mistake, just kind of rushing around, going from one thing to another. And I also cut some of the just general story content because we had a time pressure, which we ended up, I would have had time to do that. But there was a whole like shopkeeper sketch that I had planned to do basically during the earlier part of the session that we ended up skipping out on. And then because some of the combat went faster than I expected, like there were quite a few crits and good rolls for combat. Some of the combat ended sooner than I expected to. And then one of the encounters with a bunch of goblin gangsters, I didn't even intend or expect the party to try to make into a peaceful situation. So I ended up needing to make up an NPC on the spot, which is something that I would say that every Dungeon Master should be prepared to do, is I put a character in expecting them to be basically just a combat unit, and they wanted to negotiate and talk with this character. So Snickers was born. Snickers is the leader of the Goblin Gangsters. He was not named in my notes. He was not supposed to be a character, and then I just like gave him like a goblin sounding northeastern accent. And it was a funny conversation, so I'm glad that it happened, but that's another thing to be prepared for. As a first-time DM, your players will choose to interact with stuff that you didn't expect them to, so don't be afraid to just make something up, and it can be pretty funny. Some of the best moments in both movies and in roleplay stuff like Dungeons & Dragons are when people go off script. So it's totally okay if people go off script. It can be some of the best stuff that happens to you. So that was a good lesson for me. So the general notes that I took after it of just things that I could do better at, and this isn't me like being mad about the session at all. I think it was a success for my first ever time trying to Dungeon Master. But things that I could have placed a better emphasis on were describing the room or the boat or wherever the party is, just to kind of set more of a scene. I did this for a couple of the situations that they got into, but I didn't really describe the boat that they got onto. I didn't really describe the area where they were performing the ritual and stuff, which that would have added a lot of feeling and emotion and atmosphere to those situations, so I could slow things down, just kind of describe what it looks like. You could also describe the temperature. Maybe it's a hot, muggy day. Maybe it smells weird or something. Just giving them a lot more depth of experience. And then another thing would be to use the NPCs to get more lore from the characters. If I gave each of the characters more time, they could have talked about their backstory more, which is going to add a lot more tension to their survival in the story. The more you know about a character, the more you want them to succeed and live, unless you hate the character, then you want them to whatever. But yeah, I could have given the characters a little bit more time to just talk about the lore and the backstory and their motivations. And then adding in more non-combat decisions. A lot of the notes that I made were just the straight up, these are the fights that they're going to be in, but I could have also added more non-combat decisions. I did add in quite a few different just environment checks of roll to see how the day goes. People really like those, where you just roll a d20, and then I had listed out for like a 20, this is what happens. For a 15 to 19, this is what happens. For a 9 to 14, this is what happens, that kind of thing. So those were good. But I could have created more party decisions that didn't happen during combat. And then another thing that I could have done was make sure after a situation is presented to the players, give each character an opportunity to kind of weigh in on the situation. Whenever you have a D&D group, you'll naturally have some people who are more forward about interacting with stuff, and they tend to act faster, maybe based on experience, maybe just based on personality. But for you as the Dungeon Master to just make sure that each player gets to contribute their perspective, at least, even if the party doesn't go in the direction that character wanted to go in, if at least they're heard, that's really important. And then I also put a note to give the party route decisions. There are oftentimes fun decisions where you can choose to take a more dangerous approach or a safer approach, like a stealth option or just a aggressive option kind of a thing. And then one of my big notes was just to take things slowly. I didn't need to speak quickly or rush us from one thing to another. Just letting the players exist in the environment and giving them some time to think about stuff. That's not a bad thing. I was a little bit pressured just by virtue of being a streamer and wanting stuff to be happening constantly, that I felt like we needed to like push for the next thing and get this done. So now that I know basically what the flow is like of Dungeons and Dragons, I do know that giving the players time where I put the ball in their court and I let them decide some stuff, that can just generally improve the tempo of the whole experience and give them more time to do fun stuff. It doesn't need to all be fast decisions from them. They can take their time to make a decision. And sometimes if they argue about stuff or get stuck on something, that can be pretty amusing too. So playing slow is something that I need to do better as a Dungeon Master, because as the Dungeon Master, you're also the one who's basically setting the tempo of the whole session, of like calling out, okay, now it's your turn to act, it's your turn to act. But I don't need to rush that. I can take it at a slower pace. This also ties in with one of my tendencies whenever I was a violist in school and stuff, is if I was more nervous than usual, I would tend to rush and play faster rather than play slower. So knowing that being a Dungeon Master is a high stress job, if I do feel the stress and I do feel the nerves, my natural tendency is going to be to speed up. So just giving myself the reminder to go slow is really good. And then another thing that I could do better is during the main combat sequences, say there are like 6 goblin gangsters and 3 party members. After a goblin dies, just updating people on, okay, now there are 5 enemies left and 3 of you, and this is the one that died. That would make it a lot more clear, just so they know when it's their turn what they're up against. One thing that I'll admit that I do whenever I'm a player, not the Dungeon Master in D&D, is sometimes when it's an ally's turn, and I know that they're taking their combat action and stuff, I'll actually be reading something about my class to think about what my next move is. So I do sometimes tune them out a little bit, which means that if they did kill something and then it's my turn, I might have missed that, okay, some of these targets were dead. So just giving the players a refresher of, now you have this many enemies left. That'll help them choose the ideal spell for the situation, and also just have a better visual of what the battlefield looks like. And then another thing that I can do that would make it really fun and interactive for stream is to break the fourth wall sometimes and talk to Twitch chat. Twitch chat does have some pretty funny stuff to say, and there isn't really a reason that the Twitch chat needs to be totally closed off. If they have a good joke or a good suggestion, or I just want to kind of loop them in, that makes it a lot more exciting, and it's something that I can do as a Dungeon Master that Critical Role can do. We have like a medium-sized community here for Twitch. We don't have like the super massive 10K plus viewers, which means you can actually chat here and I can read your chat. So just taking little breaks where I can check in, make sure the chat is a part of the experience would also be good. And it wouldn't really slow us down that much. Even if it was just once an hour, taking a peek at chat and breaking the fourth wall for a little bit, I think that would be a pretty fun way to rope y'all into the overall experience. But it was really fun. It definitely, I would say it went about how I expected it would, where it was scuffed in a few ways, but overall fun. We had some good plays, we had some good laughs, and yeah, it's definitely a format that I will go for again. I also gave Twitch a few messages about the guest star thing and the frame rate issues that we were having and all that. So yeah, hope you found this post dungeon mastering thoughts breakdown useful. If you want to be a DM, you can absolutely do it. Main points of advice would be to give yourself at least some outline of how the session was going to go, so you have a basic skeleton of a story to work with, but then be totally okay with letting your players go off the beaten path a little bit and make up some stuff on the fly. You could even like write down some backup situations too, if your players are more I would say adventurous in terms of the decisions they make, where they choose not to go down where you expect them to go. That can be good. And then also Baldur's Gate 3 actually helped me a lot with just being able to know how the combat mechanics work, action and bonus action, how reactions work, just a basic sense of what all the different classes do. Baldur's Gate is very different from Dungeons and Dragons in some ways, and the main one is you get to decide your own rule set as the Dungeon Master. You can set specific rules, like Apop, when he DMs for us in Wayfarers, he doesn't allow flying. He doesn't like it. He thinks it's an OP mechanic that removes a lot of the risk and danger of combat, which is totally valid, because as the Dungeon Master, you are God. You can choose who lives and who dies. You can do basically whatever you want. So the point is trying to make an experience and a set of decisions that are challenging and fun for the players. So yeah, I'll let you know when the next episode of Parrots Cove is happening and what players we have. But I just started with level 1 characters in this session, and honestly, I feel like it wouldn't have been that hard to host level 3 characters. That would have just added more work for the players, but it would give me as the Dungeon Master more room to give them more challenging situations to deal with. So yeah, thank you all for supporting Neuro Subathon 3 and encouraging me to get the Parrots Cove D&D one-shot stuff off the ground. Big ups to our 3 amazing players, Trisha Payne, Apoptosis, and Kessnuts, for being excellent guests, being very patient with me as I worked on my first time DMing. And I will see you on the next one.